class. In this video, we're going to be changing our Access database application to be an N-tier or layered application. We're just going to go with that kind of architecture, show you how we can move things around to facilitate a layered or a tiered approach. A layered approach is one where we separate out the different responsibilities in our code. In an N-tier or tiered approach is where those layers are moved to their own separate execution environment or machine. So we can think of this as, again, our user experience, the form code running on the client machine, our business logic, our member class, running on our application server, and our data access running on our database server. The way we have everything in our application right now, we have it all kind of in the same place. Our form is controlling our application, if you remember. And so looking at our code, all of our code is here in our load button on our form. So we connect to our provider, our database, we issue our command, we get our results in a reader, and we process through that reader. When we're done processing the reader, we close out the reader in the database. So we kind of have everything lumped all together here. It's great to show you how to use the database, how to access things, but in our N-tier architecture, we want to separate out these responsibilities a little bit. So let's create a new project. I'm going to close these items, and on our solution, I'm going to add a new project. Now I want this to be a Windows Forms app, and I'm going to name it DB Access 3-tier. So it's going to be using Access still, but it's going to be using that 3-tier architecture structure. Now I'm going to update my form. And I'll add that 3-tier description into our title. Change my color so that it stands out from the other application. Oh, you might not like that one, huh? How about salmon, a little less disruptive? I can leave my 4-color black and set my font to 12 points so that you can see it hopefully in the video. Now for this application, we still have a few components on our form, if you remember. We have a label at the top, that is our heading, and it's going to have a text property. It says member list, and I'm going to change that font size, be quite a bit bigger. Now under our member list heading, we want a list box, and this list box, I will name it LSTBX members. Don't think there's anything else we needed to change about that list box. And then I'll put our button at the bottom. And our button will say load data. And we'll name that button BTN load. That's what we really need in our form. So I'm going to double click on our load data button to create that information. But I see that I still need to rename this form. So let's rename it form list.cs. And in my new project, I would like to include the members class from the project that we created earlier. Lots of ways I could do that. I'm just going to copy it and paste it into our new project. There's the one I wanted to close. All right, so now we have our member class in this project. Again, we could have created a reference to that other project to get that member information. I'm going to set this as our startup project. So we know that our form is going to want some data from the database. And we know from our previous project that we had to open a connection to the database and we had to run an SQL command to get that data out of the database and then close the database. So I want to create a new class that's going to do all of that data access for us. So let's add a class and we call it data access.cs. And in our data access class, we're going to have all of those components, the database components that we used before in our forms class. So let's create those. As we start with our data access class, we're going to need system.data.OLEDB to give us that information back. I'm going to add using system.collections also, because we're going to want to return that data set that we get back from the database as a collection to our other classes. Now in our data access class, first we're going to have to declare our class fields. And some of them are objects, aren't they? So we're going to have our private. Now this is going to be a static class. I want people to be able to call the methods in this class without instantiating an instance of it. So I'm going to make each of these a static object. I need that OLEDB connection. We had OLEDB command that we call dbcmd. We had our OLEDB data reader that we called DB reader. Now a couple of strings that we need. We have our connection string and our SQL string. So that's a good start to all of the different pieces of information that we know we need for this class that we used before. Now the first method that I want to create in our class is going to be one to open the database. Now this open database, I'm just going to really be copying a couple lines of code from our previous project. First, we're going to set our connection string equal to provider equals Microsoft.ace.oledb.12.0. And of course, remember in that previous video, showed you how to go find and load that data provider if it is not available on your machine. Now our data source is going to be our memberdb.accdb. I'm going to close this string in C# with a semicolon, and that sets up my connection string. Now I can open my connection. It's going to be a new connection using that connection string. I want to open that connection. And I need to put all of this within a try. Now when you close that curly brace, it should tab your code over. And we want to enclose, of course, all of our database access within a try. I'm going to set this catch up a little bit differently than what we've done in the past, because we are not like in our user interface class here. We're in a class that's going to be behind the scenes. So if we do encounter an error, I'm going to log that error to the error console. And then we would be able to find that as developers if we needed it. Now that's the end of our open database method. I think I want to go ahead and create a closed database method too. It's going to be static also. And in our close, just like we did before, we had dbreader.close, and then we closed our connection. Now, because we're going to do this within a class, and I need to put this within a try catch, we're going to change things around just a little bit. So what I'm going to try here is to close my reader. If it won't properly close, I'm going to catch that exception as an object named exe and log that. To the error output. So using the error output is not much different than using the console.writeLine. It's just that we would be able to find it on an error output list if we needed to. Now within our catch, that's great. We're catching that close error, but we're going to do a little bit something different here with our close of the connection. I'm going to put it within a finally clause to say I want you to close that connection, whether that reader closed successfully or not. No matter what, close it. So that would be the end of our close database method. So I'm going to zoom back in a little bit so we can see more code here. Now we should have our open database method created in our data access class, and we have our closed database method created in our class. So a few more things that we need to do. I want to create another method that returns data, all of those rows from the database. So I'm going to be returning that OLE data reader is the object type, and we're going to call this method read member. I left it lowercase because our table name was lowercase, but it doesn't look very good. So in our read member method, again, we want everything within a try. We're going to set up our SQL command. See how I'm making you type all this again? You're saying, why can't we copy it? Well, because you need the practice. Okay. We want to select everything from our member table, and we want to order it by last name, ascending. Put a space at the end because I need a space in that SQL syntax, and then I'm going to add that I also want first name sorted ascending, and close my SQL command with a semicolon, and then close my C# command with a semicolon. Zoom in so you can see that better. So there's our SQL command. Same thing as we did before. We're going to set up our command object as a new OLE DB command. We're going to tell it that its command text, the command to run, is in this string called SQL, and that its connection is named dbcon. So we're setting up those properties for our command object so that it knows how to make that linkage to the database. Finally then, we're going to run maybe the SQL command and return the result set in a reader. Our DB reader is going to be equal to the output of our command when we used that execute. So that's going to go get our data. We're going to catch any exceptions again. Is an exception object named exe, and if we do get an error, we're going to log that to our error output. And then I'm going to use the finally clause to return our reader. Actually, I'm not. Might work, but I hadn't tried it, so I don't want to risk it. Now that's going to return that reader object to our caller. So now we have three methods in our data access class. We're still not ready to test it though. We have our open, we have our close, we have the read member method that's going to read all of the members from our database, from our table, and return them to us in a reader. Now let's for a moment refer back to our old project and look at the code we had there. In that code, we took this database reader and we processed each of the rows in that reader to create a member out of each of those rows. So we're going to need to move some of this information to our data access class because we really want to end up with no using clauses for any data stuff in our form class. If we can keep from it, we want to keep all those things completely separate. So let's look at that again. I need then a method to take all of these items out of this data reader and turn them into members, right? Instances of that member class. So let's create a method to do that. Because I want to put all of these members into some sort of thing, I'm going to use an array list. We also could use a list with a generic type, right? Either way. But I'm going to use an array list for now to give you experience with many different things. And I'm going to call this method get all members. Now my get all members method is kind of going to be the controller here. First, it's going to call the open. Then it's going to use that DB reader control and fill it by using our read member method. Next, we're going to allocate an array list, be our member array. I want to go ahead and create an instance of that array list so that I can just start adding to it right away. And now our while loop, again, is going to be while DB reader can be read, we need some stuff about our member. So let's go up to the top here, and in our class level fields, let's add a member. Now our member doesn't want to cooperate with us, and that's probably due to our namespace, right? So I'm going to copy this DB Access 3-tier project name, namespace, and go to our member class. Make sure you're in the new one. That's one reason we want to use using clauses and references. Make sure those namespace names are the same. Now it lets me use that member as a data type, and we're going to call this a member, just like we did previously. So in our get all members code, we're going to say a member equals a new instance of our member class, and the parameters that we want to pass to our constructor are from our reader, and we want the first name column, and we want to add our DB reader last name, in the string. It says, oh, you got to send a string, so I'm going to do a .toString on both of those. So now we've created that member object. Let's add it to our array list. Then when we are through with our loop, we need to close our database connection, run our close DB method, and then return our mem array. So it is ready to go. Now, this code, get all members, is great. It's a data access code, but it still uses this member object. And I don't want our form object, our user experience, to call our data access class directly. We want the member class to be the connection between the user experience and the data. So I'm going to update the member class. Again, make sure you're looking at the member class in our new project. And I want to add a method. So it's going to be in the same region as my toString. And I'm going to make this method static because, again, I don't want to have to create an instance of it one individual member object to use this method. I'm going to return an array list. So I better make sure I've got a using statement. For our collections. Now, this method needs a name here. It's pretty upset about not having one. So let's give it a name. I'm going to call it Get All Members. I know that's the same name we used in our data access class. There's arguments for and against that. All this one is going to do is call our Get All Members in our data access class. It's going to be the interface, the bridge between that user experience and that data access. And it's very simple there being that bridge. All right, now I'm ready to add some code to the form. Let's see what we need. We know that we've taken a lot of what we had out because it's gone into this data access method. So let's double click on our load data button to create what we need. First of all, in our using, I know I'm going to need the system.collections. And I'm going to need that Windows Forms, right? Let me get rid of that weird dot. So that should do it for me. So when I click the button, I'm going to allocate an array list of members. Do I have to allocate it as a new array list? Or can I just say to go to my member class and run my Get All Members method? That'll allocate that array list. So we can use a for each loop, and we know that each item in that array list is a member. So, whoops. For each of them, we just want to add them to our list box. And remember, that's going to run our toString method in our member class to output their last name and first name to put in our list box. That's all we need in our class. For our form, I'll go ahead and update our LDL message. Oops, I need to add that. Look at me, surprising. Let's put that on our form. We want it to be a label down here at the bottom, and I'll name it LDL message, and we'll have some nice text in there that says welcome to the member list. Back to our code. So that should be all we need. Look a little bit simpler, doesn't it? So some aspects of this are a little more complicated, that we have all these separate pieces. Some aspects are a lot simpler, that each piece is much smaller and more self-contained than before. I'm going to run this. And I'm going to click load data. And we should get an error, right? Because we don't have this database in our what folder? There we go. Nothing. I've got nothing. So And we got some weird errors here, right? Because we've got no references. If we look at our output, again, we see that we had some exceptions thrown. So it's not very clear, isn't it? There it finally is. I see it. I see our message. So I'm looking at the output screen and it's kind of a little bit buried in there. But I see the exception. Could not find file. DB access member table. And my project name is very long, but I finally see that member DB is not included in this project. So let me stop running. Notice that the error was a little bit more difficult to intercept. So sometimes some systems do spend a lot of time handling those kinds of exceptions. I'm going to go to a file folder view. And in our old project, I'm going to look at the bin debug folder. Here's our database. I'm going to copy it. I have 2 3 tiers because of that one that I messed up. That's not the right one. So bin debug, paste. Don't delete, do paste. Sometimes I think I like using File Explorer better. Use whichever one you feel more comfortable with. Go back to my solution view and let's run this now and see if we are okay because we've got our database there where it's supposed to be. Ah, much better. So now we're seeing that we stepped from our form to our member class. Our member class made that connection to our data access class, went out to the database, got all of our information, and properly returned it. Let's close out of that. Now it's really important that you get a good understanding of how this works. And our main week's project, that employee project, can be handled this way. Now, I have a little bit more work to do though to make this really 3-tier. Right now, I still have everything just in my project folder. I'm going to clean that up a little bit too. So let's, on our project, add a new folder. And the first folder I'm going to create is my UX folder. That's going to be my user experience. And I'm going to move my form into that folder. So that's going to emulate that tier. I'm going to add another folder. And this one is going to be my business logic. Kind of long name, huh? And I want my member class to go into that business logic folder and my program.cs class. Next, I'm going to create one more folder, data access, and put my data access class there. Now, we have everything separated in our project so that we could allocate out tasks and resources to different people or different machines and not have any issues. Of course, we would have some configuration to do to make those connections. Let's run this again. Now remember, my form is going to call that static method that we created in our member class to get that array list. To get that array list, it's going to use our data access class. So a little bit of rework, a little bit of redo. Of course, we'd have some commenting to do and some adding this to TFS to finish up. I'll let you do that on your own. Take a look at all of the different code that we have created here and kind of see if it's working for you. Let me show you each piece again. Here is the member code that we added, the method, to our member class. That's all. Our data access class was a little bit more. We started out with all of our private objects that we had declared in our form earlier. We created a method to open the database. We created a method to close the database. We created a method to run the SQL command and load up a database reader with the results. And then we created our method that is kind of our controller that calls the open, calls the read, and then puts everything into an array list as an instance of our member class. If you step through using the debugger, will help you also to understand how all these connections are being made. There are many, many ways to access a database. Things have changed lots over the years. The database itself hasn't, SQL hasn't, but the way we get to it, the way we connect to it, there's lots of different options. So hang on, look for similarities, and notice how you can access different databases in the same way, and you have many, many different ways to access them. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you.